just now you're speaking about both the conservative dimensions of religion and its potential revolutionary energy, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, I'd like to bring into this sort of equation the question of ideology, or if we want to talk about worldview, then you mentioning in the last part about how science, particularly modern Western science, can provide something of a particular understanding of the world whereby human beings can come together.
Right.
And so in relation to that last part, I'm interested in thinking about to what extent modern Western science becomes a sort of hegemonic, singular vision and worldview, which then again gets placed over the rest of the world as being truth with a capital T, and all other views of livings, be it Chinese medicine, to mention one example, or the traditional modalities, Ayurveda in India, which is getting revived because so many people are suffering as a result of modern medicine.
Yes.
So I wonder if there's something innately human about our desire to have narratives which have a tendency towards ideologization, whereby nothing else can come within that purview. So there's a funny sort of tension there.
Yes. Well, I think there is something innately human that says if we think we've got the right ideas, they pertain to more than ourselves. They pertain, they're valid for other people's as well. So there's a propensity to be ideological as a part of what we talked about earlier in terms of we and them. And modern science thought that it had struck off in another direction with the kind of science that came out of the Enlightenment, which is what we mean by modern science, because it imagined at that point that there was an objectivity in that science that was value neutral, that it didn't carry ideological values. It was subject to object in the form of a dispassionate observer with a method that lets you ratify or falsify. You checked it out with a scientific method that lets you check your objectivity, if you will. So it could be tested again and again and again. And that point of view, that this relationship is subject to object, and science, good science, done by the scientific method, is value-free, was ideologically naive about its own worldview. Now, it's true that it arose at a time when you had the colonization and actually the beginnings of globalization, and a view of nature in which nature was the object to be exploited for human benefit. And whether it's Francis Bacon or whomever it is, had this view of nature that they did not consider to be ideologically tainted. That's just how they saw the world, which the point here is that a cosmology, a worldview, is inevitable with whatever science you're practicing. And it played into imperialistic plans. It played into this great mission of civilization that we talked about, and saw itself as serving that, but doing it in a way that the science was somehow not implicated in a direct sense. I mean, the doing of science was different from that. So it became oppressive, and it became, that cosmology became part of a grand narrative that was oppressive, and said, no, your other traditions, which aren't done as good science, whether it's acupuncture or traditions in India, foreign, those were denigrated, those were dismissed, ignored, maybe despised in the name of modern science, which was naive about the way in which its cosmology already carried.
And arrogant as well.
Yeah,
it's back to the question.
It is arrogant. Yeah, and I think part of the issue is in assuming that the proper relationship is one of subject to object, and that should permeate everything. Now, science itself is changing on this account, and it's a good thing. If you look to a religious tradition as helpful in understanding this, what comes to mind for me is the classic text by Martin Buber. The title is I and Thou, but the book is about two kinds of relationships, and it's not I and thou, I and it. In the book, it's I hyphen thou and I hyphen it. That is who we are as selves, as human persons, is made up of both subject-object, I-it relationships, and subject-subject relationships, I-thou. And the relationship with the thou isn't only another person. For Buber, you have an I-thou relationship with a tree, as an example, and the supreme thou, God. But modern science played into the hands of a utilitarian and imperialist enterprise that saw everything in subject-object relationships, to the neglect of subject-subject relationships, where there's a reciprocity, where there's communication, where there's not distancing, not the dispassionate observer, but the engaged partner, engaged subject. And the modern world has, modern, I mean now from Enlightenment science and Industrial Revolution and the kind of economy we have, is utilitarian and imperial and arrogant in that sense. Now, I don't want to sound anti-science, because science itself is now recognizing through its own method that there's subjectivity in quarters that it didn't regard as subjects before. This quite fascinating book by Peter Wohlleben, The Hidden Life of Trees, we now know on scientific grounds that trees have a way of communicating with one another that we had no idea about before. And lots of animals have consciousness and communications are subjects. You know, they're not Descartes' you know, non-conscious machines, yes, yeah, automatons or automatons of some sort or another. So I don't want to come across as anti-science. Science itself is kind of correcting, if you will, its own presumed relationship of subject-object as the only way to do science. So now Franz de Waal says we may not be smart enough to know how other creatures communicate.
Are we smart enough to know how smart animals are? Is this the title of the book? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
We may not be smart enough to know that. But so, well, that's enough of that. I always kind of fall back on Buber because it's not I as separate subject and thou. The I itself is constituted by subject to subject and subject to object relationships. They're hyphenated, and we're a mix of both. And we can't be only one or the other without to the detriment.
This is so beautiful, and thank you so much again. I love that idea. It's so powerful that we, each and every one of us, no matter who we are, no matter our backgrounds, we have hyphenated existences. As someone who, for a long time, you know, had this realization of his post-colonial hyphenized, you know, constitution, I really appreciate that, because that gives a whole new spin on both my own sense of myself, but also how I try to make better sense of the world. We are all hyphenated beings, and in the hyphen itself is where the great work is happening, as it were.
Yes, it's another way of saying that is, and the theologians have been important to me on this, is that, and the ecologists, that everything is relational. Relationality is reality. Reality is relational at every point, and it's not autonomous subjects deciding to relate to other autonomous subjects. The relationality is in the web of existence itself.
Beautiful.
So we're hyphenated in that sense. Then the question becomes, what are healthy or good relationships?
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Relationality is reality. This is so beautiful. Thank you so much indeed, Professor Rasmussen. It's been such an honor and a pleasure.
And thanks for the conversation.
Thank you.
No one way. No. So what are you going to do? You're just